to episode 33 of 100 Years of Marine Corps Tankers, a station dedicated to honoring the legacy of Marine tankers and remembering the stories of what made the community special, told through those words of Marines that towed the line. Joining the channel today is a Marine tanker who spent over a year in Vietnam during some of the toughest of times. Having been involved in supporting a number of highly kinetic firefights, it is with great respect that we welcome to the channel Corporal Francis Remkiewicz.
Thank you. Call me Frank, please.
All right, sir. All right, Frank. So Frank, how did the nickname Tree come about?
Oh gosh, I'll tell you. I was in country about 2 minutes, and up at Dong Ha, I was walking down, and there were a couple of guys loading napalm mixing it and loading it on a flame tank. And I got up, I walked up to them, and I said, "Hey, I'm new. Can I help you?" And of course, their jaws dropped and went, "Oh, we got a guy that can help. All right." So I got up on the tank, and as soon as I got up, Blues, Roger Unwin, who was the driver, said, "My God, you're tall as a tree." and that from that point on, that's stuck. So, and you know, it's interesting to note that I've told my family that anybody that calls for Frank, take a message, hang up, whatever. If the first words out of their mouth are "is tree there," I want to take the call.
Yeah, I gotcha.
So and my family knows the difference. They really do.
Well, you know, this is going out to social media, so you might be getting a hell of a lot more phone calls asking for Tree. So how did it come to be that you enlisted in the Marine Corps January 16th of 1968?
Well, another funny story. I graduated from high school. I was in a rock and roll band at the time, and we had all had an apartment together. And the bad part was we all worked at the same place. It was a synthetic marble factory, and we made vanities and that sort of thing. They shut the plant down. So all four of us at one time were out of work, and that meant that the apartment eventually had to go. And so we all took off into our own sort of neck of the woods. I went back home, and I looked for a job. This was probably August or September. And I started to look for a job, and there at that time there wasn't, unskilled labor, and there wasn't much that I could do. And so I finally decided to enlist. Now, my father was in World War II as a Marine.
Wow.
So I was raised kind of in a Marine family. When I say that, I mean the discipline, the characteristics, the honor, duty, commitment, those kinds of things. Yeah, I had those. That wasn't a problem. But I decided that, although my father had died, I decided, well, I don't want to be like my dad. So I went to the Army, and I said, "I'd like to enlist." And the guy looked at me and he said, "How tall are you?" I said, "Well, I'm 6'7". He said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you. This is, draft height was 6'6". So, we can't take you. You're too tall."
Wow. So
as I'm walking out the door, I said, "Oh, really? I'll show you." I walked 2 doors down. I skipped the Navy, mind you, and went into the Marine Corps recruiter. And I said, "I want to go to Vietnam. I want to be a Marine." And he said, "How tall are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm told I'm over the draft height. I'm 6'7". And the recruiter said, "Duck." So I enlisted, but I was 17.
Okay.
So not technically, I couldn't enlist without my mom's permission. And my mom wasn't too terribly opposed to what I was doing, but she said, "I want you to stay for Christmas. I want you to be home for Christmas." And so we cut a deal, and I said I would be home for Christmas. I went down to the recruiter, got a delayed enlistment, and shortly thereafter, whoosh, and I was off to the Yellow Footprints.
And the Yellow Footprints in this case was San Diego. And
yes.
then You went off to ITR and then
Yeah,
went to tank school at Camp Pendleton, which
that's correct.
the channel recently learned, at least I recently learned that in that time, Camp Pendleton was home of tank school. And then
Yeah.
you were off to 3rd Tank Battalion. What?
Let me back up to when I put boots on the ground, because that was, I got off in Da Nang, and up to that point, I was on a lark. I was thought, this is going to be fun. We're going to have a good time. It's going to be a challenge, but it'll be okay.
Mhm.
Well, as I'm getting off, a whole slew of Marines are getting on to go home. And almost all of them, if not all of them, had that 1,000-yard stare.
Mhm.
And the first thing that crossed my mind was, oh crap, what did I get myself into? And it was really, for me, it was really frightening.
Mhm.
And so when I got to third Marines, I swore to myself I would pay close attention to anybody that said anything to me, and I did. And it was, I don't know if it was more than a day. They shipped me off to 3rd Tanks up in Dong Ha, and grabbed a 6x, I think it was a 6x, and traveled up to Dong Ha, and that was it. I was off to the races, and the unusual part was we came over as a class, and they split us up about 50-50, half of us going to 1st and the other half going to 3rd. And all but one person, a close friend of mine, was went right into tanks. I have no idea how they do this. Maybe you understand it better than I, but they spun one guy off and sent him to military police, military police. And so he took off, and then the rest of us, like say, we're at 3rd Tanks, and it wasn't a day or two. It was probably about a day afterwards that I was walking by, and eventually hooked up with Blues and Sparrow, the flame tank folks. And to this day, the three of us are pretty much inseparable. We live in different parts of California.
Sure.
But we travel. When we travel, like to the reunion and things like that, we travel together. It's that. You must know this, but the camaraderie. It's the only people I trust. I'll be honest with you. I don't trust anybody. There's a certain point at which I don't trust my own family. but with these guys, when you get to the reunion, it's the only place I feel safe. It's just, you're with guys that you've been with through thick and thin,
right?
And they got your back always. It doesn't make any difference. And everybody talks about, well, if you need something, call me. I'll be there. They are.
Right.
They are. So I'm sorry, that was long and short of it, but yeah. So
no, that's very valuable, and that's definitely one of the things that the purpose of this channel. That's one of the things to bring out is our brotherhood and how close we are as a community, and that community extends, before you all. You mentioned your father in World War II. The tankers since 1923 on. That's who we are. We are a community. We are a family. We are a brotherhood, and now a sisterhood in case. So, but yeah. So the notes here, I guess it was very, very quickly from the time that you left El Toro, got to Okinawa, and then to Da Nang, and then from Da Nang to 3rd Marines, and then when you got to Dong Ha, I think you were expecting to fall in on a tank, specifically Alpha 2-4, and that wasn't the case, was it?
No, it had been shipped home. It had been gracefully retired after, I guess, a couple of serious firefights, and so we were sitting there waiting for, I guess, about a week, maybe 10 days before the new Alpha 2-4 came in. Yeah.
And when Alpha 2-4 came in, you guys affectionately named her. Is it the Judge?
The Judge. Yep.
The Judge. All right.
Yep.
So Alpha 2-4 the Judge, and you were assigned as a gunner at that point.
Yeah, that's where I started. You bet.
Okay.
And I enjoyed it thoroughly. It used to be a real challenge. We would. There were a couple of times where we would practice, and the practice involved a Willie Peter round popping off from a mortar. You'd be cruising down one of the back roads, and everybody got timed based on the time it took to move the turret, get the rangefinder onto it, and then fire the round and hit the target.
Mm.
And I can't, you know, it was just fun for me. A little claustrophobic at times, but you know, it just, you know, I don't know if it's the trigger or what, but it was just fun. So yeah, I started there.
So 6.7, and
Yeah.
obviously behind me is the image of the M1A1, which I think, like we talked, was maybe a little bit bigger than what you had. How did you fit in the gunner's hole at 6.7? How did you figure out how to position your legs and
getting in was a little complicated, difficult. Once there, I was comfortable. When I stood in the loader's hatch, down with my feet on the turret, of course, on the floor of the turret, I stuck out about chest high.
Wow.
And then when I was in the TC seat, because of the cupola, it was a little less exposed, but yeah, you know, you have to be exposed anyway. So, I mean, a lot of that time. So that and it just never bothered me, you know. The only thing I couldn't do easily was sleep in the turret, and I got used to sleeping on the armor plate on the back.
One of the favorite places to sleep for a tanker.
Yeah.
So I know there's a story here. I'm gonna try to pull it out of you. Sergeant Joe Bonilla was your tank commander, and it says here that Sergeant Joe Bonilla gave you kind of your first leadership lesson on "quote unquote" how to stay alive. What's the story behind that?
But as I told you, the people that this is going to sound awful, and it's not meant to, but you learn very quickly. Let me say it this way: you learn very quickly. If you wanted to stay alive as a new guy, you found people who had been there a while, and you listened very closely, and you did exactly what they said. And that's, I started with Joe, and Joe taught me how to gun, and then he rotated home, and I had a tank commander, Bert Travail, Canadian by birth, American by naturalization, and John Wayne by choice. He was tough. He was really tough. And if you didn't do anything right, if you were in the gunner seat, he'd kick you right in the back of the head. But he's the one that I really credit with learning enough and understanding enough to really survive, not just survive, but to thrive in that environment. If that probably sounds weird, but it's such a completely different. It really, you know, when we spoke about going back to the world, this was not the world. It was, I don't know what it was exactly. I can't describe it, but it was not the world. And so it meant it just was different place, and normal everyday actions, thoughts, whatever, had no bearing. Had no bearing. You had to learn to survive, and there was only one way to do that, and that was by listening to the guys that had been there and had survived. And I was always told that the two times that were the most dangerous were when you were brand new and when you were short. In either case, it was hazardous. Brand new, you know, you could hang on to somebody, get close and hang on. As it turned out, when I was short, I had a little bit of a problem. Not because I was so much short, but just it was just one of those things. So
you didn't become short for a heck of a long time.
I spent pretty much 13 months.
which is insane. That's just such a long time in country.
Yeah.
You became a tank commander February of 1969 on the Judge when Sergeant Joe rotated out,
Yeah.
and then of those 13 months you spent in the bush supporting the Marines from 3rd, 4th, and 9th Marines, as well as supporting several of the Army Republic of Vietnam units.
Yep.
And the operations that you were part of are just so incredibly historical. Con Thien, Charlie 2, Cam Low, Alpha 4, the Washout, Rockpile, Vandergrift, and Laos. I mean, every one of those has a book or a movie or something associated with it, just because of the just incredible kinetic fighting that you all did, for a very long time. What are some of your personal memories from these operations?
Being on the beach, that was kind of weird. It was well, we were out there. It was about 130, and we all when we got off guard. I mean, we were always on guard, but when you stood down, we slid under the tank just to get out of the sun, and still protect yourself with the road wheels and whatnot. Con Thien and Charlie 2 were probably the places I called home. Charlie 2 more than Con Thien. I spent probably more time at Charlie 2 than Con Thien because 2nd Platoon, that's kind of where we were assigned most of the time. But Con Thien was for lack of a better way of saying this, home was to me Con Thien. And it was an unusual place. There's a bunker, an old French bunker out a little bit further north, not much, but a little bit further north. And I have that tattooed on my back. I'm in the process of telling my story in tattoos. And so I've been, that's one of those things that happens to be there. But the night we got sent home, we were out of Charlie 2. We've been, let's see, we've swept Leatherneck Square a number of times, both as light section, heavy section, platoon, company, depending on what everybody was doing out there. And then to our west, which is the mountains, Mutter's Ridge is out there, which is a pretty famous place. So turns out that out in that neck of the woods was a huge complex for the NVA. It was a combination hospital, R&R center, and you never got out there without getting. I'm sorry, I'm trying to control my language here.
No, you can cuss on here. We're Marines. Most of the audience is Marines. If you want to tell the story in your language, use your language.
It hit the fan almost always. Everybody. It didn't make any difference who you were, if you were with tanks or not with tanks or whatever. It was rocky to say the least. I've been out to past Quezon. I have not been to the Rockpile, not physically on the Rockpile. Been by it a number of times. I think we went to Quezon once, and then we ended up across the border once. Been to the Washout Valley that was with 9th Marines, and let's see. A lot of folks spent time at Cam Low Bridge, which is just outside, essentially just outside of Dong Ha. Never did that. Forded the river a couple times, and there's a little small spot called the Washout, and there's I can't think of the name of the book, but one of the books that was written about the I-Corps area. Has the original battle of the Washout. Okay. And so it was a couple of destroyed tanks and whatnot out there, and it was a bridge that the engineers re-engineered it, but tanks couldn't go over. It was the bridge wasn't sturdy enough to hold a tank, so we always went down across the river, or actually more of a creek, and there was a little bit of a base camp there that we stayed at. And I'm trying to think if we were probably in the DMZ one time. A recon battalion late at night got caught out there, and I don't know what it is about recon, but they great guys, work hard, travel light. I mean, they're great guys, but they just can't pass up a fight. They just can't pass up a fight. And they got pinned down, and so one night we had to go out there and kind of bail them out. So I think I was in the DMZ, or if I wasn't in it, I was awful close to it.
Right.
One time. So yeah, it was never went as I recall, went by way but never was in way. That it was I was a TET replacement in June of '68 roughly, and so way had already been and gone. I don't mean to give them short shrift.
Right.
That was a hell of a battle, and I know guys that were there, but we just never got out to way. Now the Mac V I think is out there someplace, but and most of the time, I mean, I was back in the rear area on occasion. I'll tell you a funny story. My platoon commander, we were at Charlie 2, and he said, "Well, Trey, it's time for you to go do KP." And I said, "No, it's not. I'm not going to KP." "Well, yeah, but everybody's got to take a turn. You got to rotate in. You got to do this. It's just all part and parcel of the thing." I said, "Lieutenant Fuller, you can't send me there. This is where I belong. I belong out here." "Nope, you're going." So he sent me back. 3 days later, I was back. I had managed to screw my feet up so badly that by the time, about 3 or 4 days, I was back. He was pissed beyond belief. Absolutely pissed. But I got to where I really liked being in the bush. That's the only place I felt not wanted, but needed. And to be honest with you, I felt most comfortable. I know it sounds weird, but I felt most comfortable in the bush. I am not your standard spit shine and whatnot Marine. I'm a warrior, I guess is the best way to describe it. And so I just, like I say, I just need a volunteer to go someplace. Yeah, I'll go. Let me just, point me in the direction, and I'll go. And so that's kind of the way it was.
So June of '68, like you'd said, there had already been a lot of significant tank battles, particularly involving Marines. So did you get kind of a better picture than maybe some of the guys that were there before you? Was there some techniques and procedures that were kind of passed down from Marine tanker to Marine tanker and saying, "Hey, this works, this doesn't work"? Like how did you prepare kind of going into these battles?
That's exactly right. That's the value of being there a long time, and that's the drawback of being an officer. Yeah, the officer served 6 months, who knows where, and then 6 months in tanks. My last lieutenant, platoon leader, spent 6 months with the grunts, and he was probably the most trusted officer, at least in my platoon, that I could possibly imagine. Hank and I are still friends, and I'd go to hell and back with Hank because he knew the lay of the land. By the time he got there, he had been with the grunts for a little over 6 months, and this was a guy you could trust. He wasn't he wasn't arrogant. He knew he needed to talk to people. He consulted. He didn't shirk his duties, but he always asked, "Well, what do you think?" And that enamored him to everybody. because at least he took our thoughts into consideration before he did anything. And he always looked out for us. He was a good guy. I know there was one occasion, this is kind of a funny story too. There was one occasion, I think I was back, there were several of us back in division for, I don't know if it was TC school or whatever, some having to do with it, or corporal or whatever, but we were a pretty ragtag group of people. And last day we were headed back out to catch a 6x and head out to Dong Ha. Now, had a cover, boots weren't bloused, shirt wasn't really buttoned up much. And wouldn't you know, commanding general drives by. Right behind him, first sergeant. And, I recognized the flags, but I thought, well, that's interesting. And he just drove by. Well, first sergeant turned around, came back. And I was salty. What are you doing? Why are you out of uniform? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you blouse? Why aren't you cover? Where's your black jacket? All that sort of stuff. And I said, well, sir, we're just headed back to Dong Ha to get back on, go out to the bush. He said he didn't care and all that stuff. And finally I looked him in the eye and said, well, what the hell are you going to do? You going to send me to Vietnam? Oh, that was not a good thing to say. I got back to Dong Ha, and the captain just read me the riot act. And then I said, well, just let me go. He said, go, get out of here. So I got to Charlie 2, and just Hank sent me out into the bush. You got to go hide for a while, bud, because this is not working for you. So, so it like I say, it just, and it's, those kinds of moments that really punctuated and made some of that more livable, but I knew I would not survive for long back in the world. It just, it wasn't, it just, I got too salty. I liked combat too much. They could have left me there and I'd have been fine. Just, me and a couple of tanks, and we'd have been just fine for however long, until 75 anyway, when we actually absolutely had to go home. So, but yeah, it was.
Let's talk about Laos for a moment. I know there's a story here where up on Hamburger Hill, I think something along the lines of the Army was pinned down or they were jammed up, and you were the tank commander at this point. Can you kind of set the stage as to how you kind of came into that and how that transposed?
Well, most people saw the first half. There's a movie about Hamburger Hill,
right,
with Dylan McDermott and Vincent D'Onofrio, real young guys. And they talk about it, and I've watched real footage from Hamburger Hill. The Army was out in the valley. There are two valleys. One's the Washout. I think the other one is the Dakar, or something to that effect. And that valley is in Laos. And what was happening was NVA was running. That was a pretty standard resupply route. And the Army, and they were building up at that time for a second tet. And so they sent the Army out to engage, essentially search and destroy. And they used the Army as the hammer, and they used Alpha Company, the tank, it was a full company, such as it was, as the anvil. So we ran, essentially what we were doing is a hammer and anvil. I don't know if they still call it that or not, but blocking force, if you will.
Right.
And so, and it was kind of odd because most of the time I didn't care where I was. Most of the time I pretty much knew by sight and by discussion where I was. And we stopped one point, and I got my maps out and I said, "Oh crap, we've left Vietnam." And,
Wow.
and so we straddled. I think we straddled Laos and Vietnam. And according to Hamburger Hill, they spent days trying to get up this hill, and got chewed up really badly. Finally got to the top, and the NVA by regiment just about left. And so they were down in the Washout Valley, and we were up on the road, and we could see them. And they had no idea we were there, none whatsoever. And the captain said, "Let's go to it." We opened up, and every tank used every round they could get their hands on. We resupplied, and we took out, my guess is someplace between 1,000 and maybe 1,500 of them. They had no idea what hit them, none whatsoever. It was closest thing to a turkey shoot I've ever been at. And we were never, I mean, we got shot at, but we were, they were shooting up, we were shooting down. It's, I mean, it's just a tremendous advantage to being on the hill. And so we were really never threatened in any meaningful sense. And it's, I'm fairly certain you won't find that in any after action reports. You won't find that in any command reports. It's just, and I'm thinking that it's because we were in the wrong place. We were in a place we shouldn't have been, or at least that's what I'm thinking. But it was, like you say, it was, I take some pride in when I watched that movie, knowing that we got even for all the damage they did on the other side of the hill.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And then I talked earlier about your joint operations with the Arvn. And can you talk about some of your operations you have with those soldiers?
We were out on that west side with operating with the Arvn, and let me just say, I would have never preferred, particularly after this one, I would have never preferred to work with the Arvn. We did a couple more times, but it just wasn't the same thing. When they got pinned, we got pinned down. There were a couple of, I think they're 51 caliber machine guns in nests up in the hill, and the Arvn took off. And when we finally got them rounded back up again, the officer in charge came over to my lieutenant and said, "Well, you guys go up first, and then we'll follow you up." And Hank said, "Nah, that ain't the way this works, bud. We go up together or we don't go." And so in order to convince the Arvn officer, in order for him to convince his troops to move out, he actually had to shoot somebody in the foot. They weren't going to move until he shot somebody in the foot. So, and there's this reluctance. A friend of mine, we pretty much agree on this. When we were out in Leatherneck Square, you could tell when you're going to get hit, because the Arvn would kind of start to inch back behind you, and as if to say, "Well, we know something you don't know," and they did. And so you suddenly you got your ears on really tight and your eyes really peeled open, and because you knew you were going to hit the shit. So I just, my preference was, always has been, working with Marines. I got to tell you, I mean, it's just, they give the extra ounce. They're with you all the way. We don't leave anybody out on the field. It's just, you do anything you can to make sure that everybody out there is safe. I've told my family I never had to worry about myself, because I worried about the guy to my left and worried about the guy to my right, knowing that they worried about me. So they took care of me, I took care of them, and things were just fine. It was good. And I don't know that you could say that about anybody else. Forgive me, I'm gonna take a cheap shot. An army of one, that's bull. There's no such thing as an army of one.
I think they've changed their their logo since then.
So.
No, talking about working with Marines, you got to work with a very prominent unit that I think there's a lot of different opinions of when the moniker came about to be, but the one thing that I think is all agree upon is that they got their name in Vietnam, and that of course is The Walking Dead. And you had the opportunity to conduct an operation with them. Can you? And I believe it's in the Washout Valley. Can you kind of set the stage for us on that one?
Sure. Nobody. Let's forget. Here we go again. Everyone was just a tad leery about working with 9th Marines. Period, because it was like a magnet. But 1-9 was particularly. A particularly strong magnet. What we heard was that there was an NVA regiment that was attached to 1-9, and all they were supposed to do was hunt 1-9 down and kill them. And there was no love lost between those two, and so they went at each other hammer and tongs. So when we went out with 1-9, we knew that there was trouble brewing, and sure enough, there was. They're as tough as nails. God almighty, they're as tough as nails. I mean, they all knew what they were getting into, and they all knew when they went out, it was going to be tough. And in that regard, there was nothing quite like working with 1-9, because if you got into it, and you normally did, you could pretty much count on getting out of it. But my understanding is, and not to contradict whoever was gone before me, was there was a regimental commander for the NVA that gave them that moniker of the Walking Dead. And I'm pretty sure it was the guy that ran the regiment that was hunting them down, for obvious reasons. If they were assigned to 1-9 to take them out, it would be unnatural to say, well, they're just the Walking Dead. Now, again, I don't know. I read that. I don't know, someplace. It was long after I'd been with them. I knew the moniker. Right. But it was long after that I read this, and how I believe they actually got their name.
I want to hear about the whiz bang guns, and how you guys kind of came to call them that, and what it's like to be in the line of fire of one of these things. Oh
man, that's the NDA equivalent of a recoilless rifle. And the one thing that worried me more than anything else was being on the receiving end of something like that, because if you heard it, it was too late, because it just went whiz bang. That was that fast. And the few times that I saw one of these, or that I was on the receiving end of one of these, I was lucky. It was reasonably far enough away, and I was reasonably close enough to get someplace to protect myself. And I never saw a tank hit by one of these, but I would suspect it could, if you wouldn't have to be perfect, you just got to be close, and it could take a tank out, pop the turret right off it.
Wow.
So, and while we're on that, if you don't mind,
sure.
We heard tanks from time to time in the DMZ floating around. Never came across them until 75, when I was home and I watched them come across the DMZ. And the only time I'm aware of any kind of a battle was at Longvay, where they were overrun by, that's the Special Forces camp out by Quezon.
Okay.
And it was a little before Quezon. And they had 72s and 54s, I think, that came out of nowhere. And after some time, had some trouble. But actually, they were overrun. But never, other than that, never came across.
The notes I have here say that your last operation was Idaho Canyon, and there were a couple of things when I was kind of going through this that I found to be very interesting. One, the infantry supported was Kilo 33, and the Marines that were part of that unit, Captain Goodwin and somebody that became very famous a few years later was Lieutenant Oliver North. And Lieutenant Oliver North, I've read books by him. I actually had the opportunity to meet him a couple of years ago. Definitely one certain individual that has a story to tell. But your story has not been captured in any books, to including any of the books that you've written. And I would like the opportunity to, if you would, please share on the channel, the most difficult firefight of your time while in country.
Yeah, yeah. Give me just a second.
Yes, sir.
We went west of Charlie 2. We were Captain Wunsch, great man. Loved to be in the thick of it. And unlike an awful lot of captains, he was not a rear area guy. He was let's get out there, let's go get some. He was with us all the time. Greatly respected. He was short. This was I think the 25th or 26th of July as we took off. A little before then, we were all short. We were just all short, and he was shorthanded to begin with. I don't know what it's like now in terms of tankers, or what it was shortly before now, but we were never fully staffed. It just logistically, for some reason, they just couldn't keep tankers, or they didn't have enough tankers, or what have you. That also contributed to time in the bush. But anyway, we were all short, and so they were going to go out, and we were talking, and I said, I'm too short. I don't really want to go. I just assume, I'm getting ready to rotate home, and just about the last time he and I talked, he said, "You don't have to go." He said, "I'll send you down to LBJ. And you'll do some time down there, and then you come back and finish your tour anyway." I said, "Well, in that case, okay, where are we going? What are we going to do?" So, and it turned out he was short. I didn't realize that at the time, but he was also a short timer. And I suspect he was going, so why not everybody? And I understand that. That was, it was just, I was short, and to be honest with you, I wanted to get home. So I was shorthanded by a driver, by one crewman. And one of the guys that had come over with me was on another tank, but he was by himself, pretty much by himself. And so I asked him, I begged him, really, I needed a driver. And so I, please come drive for me. And he agreed, for which he still needles me from time to time. So we took off, and we were running down kind of a ravine, canyon, what have you. Got on the morning of the 27th, I think it was. We got mortared pretty badly, and several guys ended up being medevaced out. But there were still enough of us to run, kind of a limping company of tanks. And so we took off, and got into a night perimeter And I ended up, for some reason, I was, believe it or not, as a corporal, I was a senior member of the second platoon, which is just kind of weird, but I was. And for some reason, the captains put me next to him. And we, are you familiar with?
Oh, don't say the word. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Oh, I gotta burn the channel now.
I won't repeat it. I had a new crewman.
I'm gonna bleep it out for the actual live air. I'm not putting that out to social media with that word in there.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I had a gunner that I was coming back from a meeting and noticed the wrong can of fruit out and being eaten, and I about had a fit. And if I remember correctly, I may have taken the can out of his hands and thrown it. And it just started from there. It just went downhill. To this day, I don't allow that type of fruit in my house.
Neither do I.
It's just and my family all says, well, that's superstitious, and you're back here. I said, I don't care. If that ended up someplace close to me, a tree would fall out on the middle of the desert, and I'm just not about to put up with that.
Right. So
we had to. Well, we didn't have to, but we stood double watch, and so we, Grady and I, my driver, we decided we'll take the last of the watch from midnight to 6, and we let the other two guys finish up till midnight, and then we took over. Long about 3:30, the shit hit the fan. It was, they just cut loose with, I'm not sure. It was, I'm pretty certain it was more than a company. They had an entire, what I would consider to be an entire platoon of RPG types. And the captain was taken out on the first shot. It ricocheted off the turret and hit him in the head, and which was a disaster. We took 13 hits and 11 penetrations.
Wow.
And it took out my hydraulics, took out my radios, but I still had all the guns. And my loader was shot to hell. I had pulled him in, put him in the TC seat, put the headset on him, the helmet on him, and said, get somebody on the radio. Well, I knew the radios were dead, but it's a nice distraction, right? I guess. It's not a nice one, but it was a distraction. I'm left-handed. I don't load as a general rule. Nobody wanted me there, and I don't blame them, because it's just, it's a split-second difference, but it's a difference. Well, it turned out that the only two of us that were still functional was my driver and me. And so Grady spotted for me. I ran a killing cross most of the time, or tried to, by hand. We cranked by hand. And at least in one book, we are credited with saving the perimeter from being overrun. Wow. We blasted the hell out of them. I used everything but the 4 heat rounds. I couldn't get to the heat rounds because they were right next to the driver, and I wasn't about to turn my turret around. There was no way in hell that was going to happen. So we used all the flechette, all the canister, and we carried in those days we carried a great deal more of the anti-personnel stuff than we did with HE. We had some HE, but really by and large. Well, I started at muzzle blast, and I don't think I ever changed. Just kept firing, and interestingly enough, the gun tube was bouncing, and so Grady grabbed his shirt and tried to hang on to the gun tube, holding his shirt so that the gun tube would at least stand still long enough to get a round out. So, and then he would spot for me, and we'd crank it, and he would turn, a combination of cranking, and he would turn the tank one way or the other in order to get a better shot. And it worked. To come to find out, this is how close they were. Grady didn't know this at the time until we got out, but Grady had run an NBA guy over.
Wow.
With just pivoting. So they were damn close. And I melted the barrel on the 30 caliber, ran out of 90 millimeter, couldn't get to the 50. And I'm not sure that with that side mount on the 50 that it would have been worth a whole lot anyway. But so we backed off a little bit, not much, but we backed off the line. We were just sitting ducks out there otherwise.
Right.
And grabbed my the original loader that was all shot up, got him up to what became the triage center. And Doc came over and was working on us both. And he took off, and I thought, no, I got to go check on people. So I took off. So when he came back, he was, in fact, I had a couple people tell me that he was not happy because I'd left. I was looking for people that were hurt that it needed to get up to triage. Right. And finally, I got as many people up there as I could. I didn't do anything with the dead. I was more interested in getting the wounded out of there and getting them up to someplace where they could get help. And last time I brought somebody up there, I was completely washed out, and I just kind of hit the ground, and that was that. So interestingly enough, the guy that we carried up was hit by an AK-47 while we were carrying him. And I had no idea that it was still going on. I thought we were in a lull or it had stopped or what have you. But this is just how focused one gets when, I begin to understand how those kinds of things happen. Right. I didn't know anything else was going on around me. All I knew was I had to get this guy up to triage. And I was lucky, I guess. I was just plain lucky. So it was, like I say, it's just, the story that goes with that. Remember I told you about the guy the one guy that got spun off to MPs. Right. He used to come back. He wanted to get back into tanks so bad. It was just, and I understood it completely. But never. They just wouldn't let him go. And he begged and argued and pleaded. Finally, for this operation, they let him go. He was killed. Wow. So, it's just, and there were 3 tankers killed. I have been in conversation with all 3 families. With Steve, the guy that came over with me, I made a promise to him. Actually, we kind of promised each other, if anything happened to us, we would go find the family and talk to the family. Well, I didn't really get out of the hospital until, this was July. I didn't get out until probably mid to late October. Steve and I had kind of made a deal that if one of us didn't come back, we would meet or find and talk with the other person's family. And so when I was, of course, medevaced out, and I was in the hospital for several months. And so by the time I got out, and nothing of mine came home initially, no sea bags, nothing. Wow. And so I didn't have any any of my information that I would have had ordinarily and have been able to kind of look up. So I knew where Steve lived, tried to get in touch with him, and I could not. And so 50 years later, out of the blue, his nephew sent me an email.
Wow.
And he said, did you know Steve? And were you? And I said, yeah, I knew Steve. Yeah, we were friends. We'd travel back and forth together. And so one afternoon, we have a small place, what we fondly refer to as the ranch, in back behind Santa Maria, California. And they happened to live, the family lived in San Luis Obispo and Pismo and Atascadero, which is just up the road from us. And so we had him over for a barbecue, and we spent the whole day. I spent it with his sister, her husband, son and daughter, and I think one of the kids.
Wow.
And we talked off and on all day, laughed and giggled and cried and all sorts of stuff. And if I've ever had a weird experience, kind of an out of body type of experience, they had left. The place is out in a canyon, and it's star-studded. There's no night glow. And I could have sworn I heard him say thank you.
Wow.
So I was not able to talk with his parents. His parents had died, but I felt a weight lift off. It's hard to describe, because I'm not flaky. I'm not. I mean, I believe I am religious, but not. It's not that. I'm not evangelical or anything like that. I don't. I don't necessarily. I mean, I don't believe in ghosts and all that sort of stuff. But this was just. I was standing outside. I was by myself, and I kind of looked up, and it was a beautiful night sky, and I heard his voice in my ear, and nothing like that's ever happened before. Nothing like that's ever happened again. But that was just, and like I say, I felt like a ton had been lifted off my shoulders, that I finally accomplished what I set out to do 50 plus years before. And so it was really nice. But I've met and talked with all three of those families. I am close friends with Captain Wunsch's sister, youngest sister. And leading up to this interview, yesterday I did a podcast with that family, and they had not been together to talk about their brother since the day he died, since the day they were notified.
Wow.
And so it was again, it was a moving, it was a spiritual experience. It's just to listen to them talk about their brother and who he was and how he fit into the family, and we laughed. I mean, his brother told stories of giggly stories about him, and his older sister would talk about him, and they talked about him going to the academy and how he got a choice between Navy and Marines, and he picked Marines, and it was a very wonderful experience from my vantage point, to hear them all together to talk about a member of their family that they dearly loved. That family is really, really close. And it just, like I say, it was just so, in fact, Suzanne and I call her sis and she calls me bro. I browse the virtual wall every now and then. And first thing I do is I look for people I know. And I was looking for Mike's picture and signature, not signature, but name and all that sort of stuff. And I got there, and there were a couple of nice, I don't want to sound too derogatory, but there were nice sentiments, thank you for serving or what have you. And I thought, this man deserves more than that. This was a special guy. And so I jotted a note about how I knew him and what we did together and all that sort of stuff. Her brother caught it and gave Suzanne, my email address, and she emailed me and said, "Are you so and so?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "You serve with Mike?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "I'm Mike's sister."
Wow.
And it was just, we were off to the races ever since then. Nice, just the salt of the earth people.
You talked about sentiment. You talked about not knowing necessarily the right words to say, and I'll be honest with you. The beginning part of these interviews that the channel has done were with people that I like to call peers, or people that I look up to as gentlemen that were my leaders that I certainly had the honor of serving with.
Yeah.
When I started having the opportunity and the privilege of interviewing Vietnam tankers, that's one of the hardest things that I've had to deal with personally, because I don't know what to say to you gentlemen, because I have such a high level of admiration and respect, and really no true perspective of what it was that you all went through. Yeah, sure. I have a combat ribbon. Roger, I've been there.
Yeah.
But it's different. And I look at it as being very, very different. The experiences and the operations and just the pure hell that you all went through, I don't necessarily know that we did on the same level. And because of that, I don't know what to say to you gentlemen to show you the respect that I have for your generation of tanker, and just a true understanding of the things that you all went through that really paved the way for us. The lessons you all learned the hard way, we were taught in books and text in school and training. And all I can say is thank you. I have the absolute utmost respect for you guys, and just thank you.
Pay it forward. Pay it forward. We are all, the Marine Corps is built on the shoulders of those who went before us. I have, for my father's generation, I can't imagine what it was like to hit a beach at Tarawa or Iwo Jima or someplace like that. And every time I come across what few are left, Marines from World War II, I have the same feeling that you do. And the interesting thing is that we are ordinary people in extraordinary times. And so we end up doing what appears to be extraordinary things. But we're just ordinary people. I never had a problem. I was not well received, nor none of my peers were well received when we came back, but it didn't make that much difference to me, because it was what I wanted to do. I picked it. And whatever happens, it was up to me. I hold no animosity. I don't, you didn't have to go in. You didn't have to, you just didn't have to do anything as far as I was concerned, because that's your choice. And if you're willing to accept the consequences of your choices, I don't have a problem with that. This was my choice. I took the consequences, and some of it wasn't so good. A lot of it, I have friends that I would not trade for anything that came out of that, and that's makes me much richer than anything else. I'm sure you feel the same way, that you have people that and that you've been in touch with, and we're just normal people. And we're just, I mean, it's just like I say, I have incredible amount of respect for you guys, because if it wasn't for you guys, we'd still be out in the cold. The VA would still be wondering who we are and what we're doing and why are we bothering them and all that. It was you guys that, for better or worse, that put TBI and PTSD and all that stuff on the map, so that we then were able to follow in your footsteps and get some service from the VA. So please, it is reciprocal. I cannot imagine being in Fallujah. I cannot. Where I was in a free fire zone. If it moved, I killed it. Simple as that. I can't imagine having to think for even a split second, was that a good guy or a bad guy? I just couldn't imagine that, because I know that split second will get you killed. I'm sorry, but and if I like the idea of shooting first and asking questions later, in this circumstance,
Right.
in these circumstances.
Sure.
So I have, the feeling is quite mutual. You guys are great.
Thank you.
And you got the best tanks in the world to do it with. So,
Well, had at least. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, had. Yeah.
And that kind of takes us to a point where I've said it before, the message of the divestment, it's 100 years from 1923 to 2023. So that encompasses, your generation, obviously my generation, and those that came before. But it doesn't make it any easier for any of us. The community is that of a brotherhood. We've already talked about that. Yep. What message do you have to, the generation of tankers that might be watching this now, and those that won't necessarily be tankers? What message do you have as somebody that came before?
You'll recognize this as we recognize this. When I was growing up, I would time to time ask my dad, "What'd you do? How was it?" And the only thing my father ever said to me was, "Well, I used to get on the beach after everybody hit the beach, and I'd fill in the foxholes." And that's all he would ever say. And I would give anything to have a chance to sit down and talk with him and swap stories. And so my message is, just as you're doing and just as we do, don't be silent. Talk to your kids, talk to your family, talk to your in-laws and outlaws and all that sort of stuff, friends and neighbors. Let them know. Do not let anybody forget what you've done in this area, because it gets forgotten. And now in particular, because of the circumstances we find ourselves in, if we don't say something, nobody will. If you look at the literature from Vietnam, you find if you go outside that which tankers wrote, there's nothing there.
Right.
You have to actually search out and find tank stuff. I applaud you for what you're doing here. I think it's a great idea. And you got 100 years. I work with Vietnam. I got 10. You got 100. You got a lot of streets to cover before you get done.
Right.
So,
but I will offer an opportunity to talk about your 10 years, because you have done a tremendous job encapsulating and the work you've done with the books you've written and the podcast you have, just incredible. So if you want to go ahead and kind of talk about what you have already done, please, by all means, do so.
Oh, okay. Thank you. We have over the years, I'm sorry, there is an organization that's sort of it's not a sub-organization, but it's a smaller group of tankers. There's the United States Marine Corps Tankers Association. Mm-hmm. We are the United States Marine Corps Vietnam Tankers Association. And so we are limited in some respects. We take in ontos. or tracked vehicles. Actually, we take in anybody from a tracked vehicle, but primarily it's tankers. And we have over the years developed communications, different types of communications. And so we do Sponson Box, which is the written magazine, comes out quarterly. And there's a lot of good stories in there. We've done, we're on volume 4 of a series called Forgotten Tracks, which are a compilation of a lot of these stories. I run a writer's workshop for people who want to write. And then this past year, I just finished episode 14, but this past year, I came up with the idea that a lot of folks don't want to write for lots of different reasons. And a lot of folks don't want to get on a video because they're just scared of the camera. But I thought, if I catch somebody at home on a telephone call and we have a conversation, and it just so happens I record that conversation, and then I publish the conversation, then, you know, it's another way of communicating the same information that you communicate through the videos. And it's another way of capturing for posterity that, and I do it not just for us. I do it in hopes that through word of mouth primarily, that the general population, Vietnam is a terribly misunderstood time. The one thing that you guys had that we didn't have, but I think in general American society learned from us, was there is a distinct difference between warriors and what warriors do, and what the politicians do. And warriors go where warriors are told to go. They do what they're told to do because that's what we are. And with some small exceptions, that's just the way it is. And today, it appears to me that in general, society is able to separate the two. That when you go to war because somebody in Washington, D.C. says that's what they're going to do. The warrior stays prepared, stays ready to go, stays sharp. And when they're called on, that's kind of what we are. We're a warrior class. It's not, I wrote an article comparing us to gladiators, warriors to gladiators, really. There are an awful lot of similarities when you really get into the psyche of a gladiator and what they did and what they accomplished and all of that sort of thing. Not quite the same, but characteristics are the same. You go out and you fight somebody that you don't even know, but you're going to fight that person and you're going to give it all you got. Warriors do the same thing, and that's, if there were a caste system, we would be a caste in a, not so much a classic sense, but in a sense, because we protect society. Not everybody's cut out to do that. And I have never considered myself a citizen soldier. I have considered myself a warrior, because as much as I'm banged up and all that sort of stuff, if somebody said, let's go do it again, in a heartbeat, I just, what do you want me to do? Pick up a rifle and let's go. Right. Because that's where I think my duty lies. That's my contribution in many respects to society.
Tree, I thank you. I applaud. Number one, your recount of these operations. I absolutely appreciate it. I think it's absolutely important to get this message out. Like I said before, you all definitely paved the way for us, and you are certainly a warrior. And if I'm allowed to, I will call you Tree.
Absolutely.
And we will not talk about the fruit again.
Yeah, that's right.
And with that, I thank you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And
JR, thank you very much for allowing me to be here. It's a great privilege. I love talking with Marines anyway, and I'll talk your ear off if you give me half a chance. So
awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Absolutely. Semper Fidelis.
Hoorah.